Of course, all of the books of Schuon have precious pages and words and messages and paragraphs in them. There's no doubt about that. And therefore, from the point of view of posterity, I believe it's these books which are the most important. And of these, I will name four, each for a different reason. First of all, the Transcendent Unity of Religions, which in a sense summarizes his whole teaching about the levels of reality of religion, esoterism, the question of relation between religions, and it is a seminal work even today in explaining, as no other traditional writer had done, the application of the perennial philosophy and tradition to the study of various religions, and showing their inner unity, which you call the transcendent unity, at the same time the separation of these religions on the level of forms and the significance of forms on their own level, which therefore to try to avoid a kind of syncretism which was very prevalent in Europe then and is today even more so in America. That book remains a seminal book, read very often and widely, and it still has an influence in the teaching of religion, especially in America. Secondly, his book Understanding Islam, which is the most widely read book of Schuon, and remains to this day probably his most popular opus. This book, as I wrote before, is, I believe, the most important work written by a European about Islam and its inner meaning and why Muslims believe in Islam. And it opened up a whole space in the Western mind for the understanding of Islam on another level. Again, this book, for that very reason, is still widely read and very popular. And I wrote my own book, Ideals and Realities of Islam, which is also a very popular book on Islam, on purpose as a way of opening the gate and door to understanding Islam. And I say so in the beginning, in the introduction on my own book. Thirdly, I believe the book Logic and Transcendence is of particular significance. This is the most philosophical book of Schuon. He was really a philosopher in the traditional sense, on the highest level. He was a major philosopher. Because I myself, I'm a humble philosopher. One doesn't have to be a philosopher in order to be a spiritual person. Like being an artist, or he was also a painter, artist, he might be a musician. Philosophy is an art, the art of thinking in a particular way. And he was really a philosopher. And that's why he wanted to revive the correct art of thinking, of being able to think correctly. And the issues, philosophical issues, come out most in this book, Logic and Transcendence. The very title is stunning, because modern Western philosophy, especially Anglo-Saxon philosophy, which is dominant today in America and in England, which comes out of Oxford, called the Oxford School of Philosophy, really has reduced philosophy to logic, and believes that philosophy is really logical analysis. That's what's called analytical philosophy. Now, Schuon was not one of those to write against logic. He was not like the existentialist or Kierkegaard or people like that, and in fact, he severely criticized French existentialism. So he accepted the reality of logic, because logic is a reflection on the human mind of categories that belongs to the world of intelligibility. That's why we have a certitude in logic. Where does the certitude come from? It comes from the intelligible world. It comes from the true intellect. So he was not opposed to that, but he opened up logic to the other pole, which is that of transcendence, that makes this book the very opposite of a book, let's say, by Bertrand Russell called Mysticism and Logic, works of that kind. And he showed, in fact, how logic itself can lead to our understanding of the transcendent, provided it is open towards the sacred, as already mentioned. This book, especially the first part of it, is a remarkable critique of modern Western philosophy. When deconstructionism began to develop in France in the 60s and 70s, and then it spread into the United States and became very influential here, what's called postmodernism. I once asked him, I said to him that in your Logic and Transcendence, you made a critique of Kant and other people, modern philosophers, Descartes, Kant, others. Why not now add a chapter or write an essay of your critique of postmodernism and deconstructionism? Especially as many of these philosophers are from France. They wrote originally in French, Lyotard and others. He said, no, because I don't want to spend my intellectual energy writing all these things that they write. And he excused it away with his hand like that. So Logic and Transcendence does not deal with this postmodern philosophy, which has become popular in the last 2-3 decades. But up to there, it's a very profound critique of modern philosophy as it develops after the scholastic period, especially through Descartes all the way up to the 19th and 20th centuries. Fourthly, I've mentioned 3 books already: The Transcendent Unity of Religions, Understanding Islam, Logic and Transcendence. But I would add to these Esoterism as Principle and as Way. This book is a kind of synthesis of his teachings, as chapters dealing with metaphysics, chapters dealing with art, chapters dealing with spirituality, with the practical spiritual life, and it's a kind of summation and synthesis. It's his most synthetic work, which has different dimensions of his interests and teachings are brought together. It's also a remarkable work, and if read well. Now, when I mention these 4 works, it's not to say that the other works are not important. They are all important, but I think these 4 stand out specially. There are a few others, like Stations of Wisdom, there's classical works that he wrote, which are remarkable works on their own, but I would say these 4, since you asked for 4. I once, when I was preparing the anthology of his writings, which were done in the continuous consultation with him, either through letters or myself coming to see him, and we discussed a great deal. Once I told him, I said, I've assembled a large amount of your writings. Now is the point, difficult task of reducing them, although the anthology is a fairly large anthology, nevertheless, to 400 pages. And that is a very painful thing, because it's like cutting gold foil. What you cut out is also gold.